So guys, what's up? So my name is Cris Sumambot from Bsc History 11. Now I will be sharing again my last vlog for finals. I will be sharing again my reflection in the Philippine sourcebook and Torrentera. So in the lesson 11, minutes of the proceedings on the national territory of the 1971 Constitutional Convention. It discussed about the minute session by President Diosdado Macapagal, ordered the minutes of the session in February 11, 1972. The minute session concerning the national territory of the Philippines. Up to this present, there's one thing that I can see in myself that is always thinking this kind of conflict. I feel so conscious because why is it they are not know their boundary? Therefore, every country must be know their own boundary to avoid conflict to each of every country. This conflict was such an example. What happened to the Scarborough? The only thing that to avoid conflict is that we must know our limits. To avoid the conflict, we should be careful when it comes to our moves. We should be aware the every important matter to have a peace to everyone. Knowing the limits is better. Delegate Fernando Bautista, who led the singing of the national anthem, also Delegate Benjamin R. Abubakar delivered the invocation. That delegate R consists of 298 are present, so that the following delegates were recorded as absent. The archipelago of the same shall be the national territory of the Philippines, the traditional homeland of the Filipino people, whose boundaries are defined in the Philippines Constitution. So, on the 10th day of semester, the United States and Spain signed the Treaty of Paris, which included Article 3 in December 1898, together with all the islands included the treaty. The United States and Spain signed an agreement in Washington on the 7th day of November. Also, the United States and the United Kingdom signed a convention that the 2nd of January 1932 and any other territories over which the United States has jurisdiction. So, the Philippine government has been exercising jurisdiction over matters over which has authority. The other ways connecting and surrounding the numerous island of the Philippines archipelago is regarded necessary regardless of its width of proportion. The waterways within the archipelago beyond the outermost islands, the treaties mentioned in Section 1 of this document define that boundaries. The Philippine sovereignty extends beyond its land and sea borders, interval water, to a strip of water near to the coast known as the Territorial Sea. As regards its land, it extends over the airspace over its land areas, its interval sea and territorial sea. So guys, let's move on to lesson 12, the role of Islam in the history of the Filipino people. So this topic demonstrates that Islamic influences from Borneo and Sulu, the spread of Islam in the Malaysian archipelago is needed a legitimate field of inquiry. Facts demonstrate that Islamic influences from Borneo and Sulu were beginning to shed root in Luzon during the 15th century. Not long after, Islam was being strengthened in Mindanao from Sulu as well as from the Moluccas. The Malaysian port kingdoms played an important role in the international trade from the Red Sea to the China Sea. So, many of the Malay ports serve as sources of articles of trades, and as clearinghouses. Sulu was first visited by Arab traders around the end of ninth century or beginning of 4th century. Sailors in the early Islamic era traveled via route that led from Borneo through Sulu, Palawan, Luzon up to Formosa and South Japan where Chinese products were available. During the Song dynasty, then the Muslim traders were allowed once more to visit South China and old route through Indochina began to be utilized again. The first stage represents the destruction of the Arab monopoly of international trade in the Southeast Asia as a consequence of the coming of the Portuguese and defeat of Arab fleet Socotra. The Portuguese and Spaniards came in the 16th century not only to extend the possession of their sovereigns, but to spread Catholicism. The fall of Malacca in 1511 was less than 2 decades after the fall of the Moorish kingdom in from a very important point of view. Islam constitute the only ideology that resisted and combated Western imperialism and colonialism. The Javanese resistance against the Dutch and has weakened Brunei eclipsed as a commercial power and begun. The fall of Luzon and Visayas to the Spaniards is the destruction of pockets of resistance in Mindoro. The fourth stage refers to the attempts of the Sulu to regain part of the former glory during the 18th century and the early 19th century. The events is early Sulu and the Mindanao can only be understood in terms of the social and political institution of the Muslim of the South as well as the economic structure of their society. The lives of the Muslims in the Philippine South and their sultans are not evidence of an epoch character. Some Tercelas reveal dynastic rivalries and are certain Sulu model for dynastic succession. So, Lesson 13, History of Terrorism in the Philippines, an international fact-finding mission report. In this lesson, it discusses the terrorism here in the Philippines. So, there's one thing that I can see in myself that is being conscience and pity to someone of the terrorism because they are all hoping to meet peace. It is absent now because now I know that there's a connection of that to the government. But they are unreliable and traitor people. The Philippines, in the 12th most populated country, the world with 96 million people. It is the fourth largest Catholic nation with about 80% of its population being Christians. Muslims are a minority and indigenous people are also part of the population. An agrarian reform is ongoing and should end in 2008, but implementation is protracted because of landowners' resistance. The country's population is mainly rural and agricultural. Agriculture is the primary source of income for many. The CPP or NPA has been labeled as a terrorist organization by the US government and by the European Union. Peace efforts to end the armed conflict between the government of the Republic of the Philippines and the NNDFP have been going on for 21 years. CPP claims that it does not attack civilian targets and that is adheres to international law. The Philippine President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo spoke about communism as such and not only about the communist insurgency. She thanked CPSA for supporting her vision to eradicate communism in the country by 2010. Feed mission was told NPA, MILF, and the Abu Sayyaf are clearly enemies of the state. Documents are reportedly been established identifying sectorial groups as enemies. General Palparan has reportedly been the leading military figure promoting such guidelines. So there are two main Muslim armed groups in the Philippines, both advocate for the independence of the southern region of Mindanao. The Moro National Liberation Front is more rooted in Christianity, while the MILF's agenda is more Islam-based. The MNLF was originated in the late 60s to early 70s by Nur Moswari. The goal of MNLF was to establish an independent Moro nation in 1966. In 1996, the Jakarta Accord gave predominantly Muslim areas in Mindanao a degree of rules. The MLF broke away from MNLF in 1977 to put more emphasis on the Islamic roots of the movement. It viewed poverty and land issue and economic underdevelopment in Mindanao as a result of the colonization of the Bangsamoro people by the Philippine government. Feed was told that think a population of the United States or even do not exist. Human Rights Watch has listed on series of attacks perpetrated by these groups. In this lesson 14, agreement on peace between the government of the Republic of the Philippines and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. So, it discussed the agreement of peace between the Republic of the Philippines and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. The Moro Islamic Liberation Front and the Philippine government to this agreement are referred to as dedicated to restoring a calm atmosphere and a regular way of life in the area of Bangsamoro territory. In July 1897 is the reaffirming the General Armistice Agreement and the General Armistice Agreements on July 18, 1997. The frameworks of the parties' intent agreement, which was signed on August 27, 1998, and pledging to work toward a negotiated political solution. So, to the Bangsamoro issue and remaining committed to this goal, in Mindoro there is peace and stability. Remember the 1976 Tripoli Accord and the 19 1996 Jakarta Accord. The government of the Republic of the Philippines and the Moro National Liberation Front, the OIC Resolution number 59/9 of the ninth session in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in November 12, 2000. The Islamic Summit Conference in Doha, Qatar, asking the GRP and MLF to work together. The Republic of the Philippines and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front have resumed peace talks. The parties have agreed on the basic elements or principles for the resumption of peace talks facilitated by Malaysia. They have also agreed to undertake relief and rehabilitation measures for joint development project. In the lesson 15, report of the cholera epidemic in the Philippines, it discussed the cholera here in the Philippines. The bacterial disease usually spread through contaminated water. So there's one thing that I can see in myself that is being consigns to those victims of diarrhea and dehydration. The resistant struggle of 1899 to 1902 and the cholera outbreak of 1902 to 1904 into two categories. A separate period in the Philippine history, the battle against cholera in 1902 was intense. The drama was based on America, heroics, and medical knowledge. Cholera was a disease troops assigned to guard against infection in the Marikina Valley, the east of Manila. Manila's drinking water supply cholera has claimed the lives of people from all walks of life, including America, soldiers and locals, as well as renowned Filipinos, Chinese and Spaniards. The convergence of colonial welfare and disease management was aided by advances in 19th century medicine. Many towns in Luzon suffered from famine and cholera. By the time of the cholera epidemic ended, about 10,000 about thousands are died, of which were in Manila, writes Elito. The cholera epidemic in the Philippines with special interest on its consequences in Batangas. Cholera is an infection of the small intestine that leads to diarrhea, vomiting, and muscle cramps. The mortality rate for disease is anything from 5% to 50% depending on the availability of treatment. It is caused by a bacterium called Vibrio cholera that can be transmitted by contaminated water or food. The sixth global pandemic aged through the Philippines from 1902 to 1904 despite efforts by American officials to contain the spread of the disease. Before long it did so, quarantine guards were stationed on all roads, paths, and streams leading out from Manila. People sleep quarantine by riding bamas or crossing fields instead of using roads to get out of Manila. The number of deaths from cholera was high. The final number reported cases was 3,433 with 2,718 deaths. There would be more outbreaks of the disease in the coming years. So, all we need to do is to pray to God that to protect us. Okay, this is the last lesson for the Torrentera book, lesson 16, Mental, the Little Tokyo of the pre-war Philippines. It discussed about the Abaca in Davao City and Japan share a rich historical bond. There was a thriving community of around 30,000 Japanese in Barangay Mental. They left behind a long-lasting legacy that influences us to this day. The Japanese set up the broad strokes for much of the development and economic blueprint of modern Davao. One of the early Japanese settlers was Ontakyo Zaboro, who arrived in Davao on 1903. The Japanese workforce was out of work but still in Manila waiting for repatriation. Onta convinced them to move to rural Davao and begin abaca cultivation. Onta Kyozaburo was dubbed the father of Davao development. His success in abaca farming and processing new other Japanese to Mental. Then, the most advanced of all villages, Japanese built, among others, a school, cemetery, irrigation facility, ice plant, hospital, and hydropower plants. So, the most of the Japanese houses, monuments, and buildings in Mental were destroyed or looted for gold after World War II. Shinto shrines were also all over Mental, but remnants of this building could no longer be found. The Japanese were found to flee the city immediately after the war broke out. The Ontakyuzaboro monument is still standing within the Mental Elementary School. However, the nearby triangular structure was destroyed by treasure hunters looking for gold. The obelisk is known to pupils as pencil. Davao local call it pincel, and Davao became the world's biggest producer of abaca. Davao is a city of migrants, of people who have settled there from all over the Philippines. Among the earliest and most influential migrant groups were the Japanese. They deserve more thanks and recognition for their legacy than what they receive today. There are many mental in the Philippines whose uniques has been covered by the dust of time. The Japanese become the largest plantation owners in Davao. They using dummies to buy land from local landowners, and they marrying local women. In the topic 9, Ramon Magsaysay Rizal Day speech on June 19, 1956. So, the topic discussed about the Rizal contribution recognizing Jose Rizal's pivotal role in the liberation of our country. On the 4th day of June, President Ramon Magsaysay signed Republic Act 1425, that often known as the Rizal Law. Senator Claro Recto introduced the bill which mandates to incorporate the curricula of courses in the life, works and writing no limitangere and el filibusterismo. By Jose Rizal, the reaction of rectors to the post-war societal problem of neoclassicism was the aforementioned statue. According to him, reading Rizal's writing would reinforce the Filipinism of Filipino people. Young people encourage patriotism. Magsaysay delivered a speech on Rizal Day on 1956, just days after signing the Rizal Law. On Jose Rizal's birthday, the necessity of remembering him and living for our cause was underlined. He emphasized Rizal's positive nationalism, which he demonstrated via that is his knowledge of the country, Chevalier, identifying the societal issue and proposing remedies. The Rizal Law enacted 1425 requires that all the Philippines educational institutions provide Jose Rizal related courses, a law enacted by the Republic Number on June 12, 1956. Ramon Magsaysay said enables Rizal's work to be taught in all schools across the country. Magsaysay combined civic resettlement efforts with his military operations as part of his larger strategy to fight. His rural upbringing taught him that the guerrillas could thrive in the peasantry as long as they felt no obligation to the central authority. We care about giving millions of people a good living. We're concerned with giving our nations freedom and individual rights, new life and power. We're concerned with bringing our Constitution and the laws adopted for our benefit by our own free representatives to life. We are here in Topic 10, Presidential Decree Number 2, 1972. The word that struck me or affected me is martial law, because from the word martial law, we already know that what went before when the martial law happened. Martial law is very dangerous circumstances that happens in the country. There are a lot of people are affected. They also experience difficulties and crises. The societal implication of this is that all land reforms stress the importance of improving peasants, reducing poverty, and redistributing income and wealth in their favor, because they strive to develop jobs, education, and health services, as well as spread the advantages to the entire community, with the younger education as the primary objective. In the 1972, the Philippines was placed under the martial law, following a spate of bombings in Metro Manila. Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos declared the entire country as a land reform area on September 26, 1972. The decree was issued to speed up the government agrarian reform area. This national land reform program is the heart and soul of rural development strategy. Its goal is to provide rural residents with tenure security. Land reform stress the importance of improving peasants' social conditions and status, reducing poverty, and redistributing income. The land reform area helped too many people to overcome the crisis. So, they have a transformation. The next is the inaugural address of His Excellency Benigno Aquino III, President of the Philippines. So, it discussed about the political career of Benigno Simeon Aquino III, popularly known as Noy Noy, began in 1988. He was elected to the Philippine Congress for the 2nd District of Tarlac. Then, Aquino secured a Senate seat in the May 2007 elections. The 2nd District of Tarlac has 3-term maximum required by Constitution team after term till 2007. The genuine opposition party is running for election, initiating his presidential campaign. He entered the 2010 presidential election in 2019 and was elected in the first completely democratic elections. Presidential Aquino understood the need for change from the start in his platform of government. There's strong need for transformational leadership at the national level. Aquino quickly added for transformational leadership in the national level. Aquino quickly added that his parents Ninoy and Cory legacy of change was important to him. He spoke that their awakened hope and envisioned a country built on it. Strong solidarity of our society and its members and strong sense of good evil and spurred by a planned and widely shared rapid expansion of President Aquino is committed to transformational leadership. He reaffirmed his resolve to fight corruption, reduce poverty and people first, educate the public, protect public health, and also administer justice fairly. In the coming years, we will be able to mitigate our issues through excellent government. The Filipino faith will return to its natural place, and each year passes, the Filipino issue will continue to reduce as their lives advance.